Hello. In my last video we arrived at the dissolution of the monasteries, and many former monastic sites were acquired by those close to the court, some of them quickly sold on at a profit, and these sites were asset stripped, demolished to realise the value of their fabric, but also to make it impossible for any change of policy to allow restoration. Gilbert Thacker, who acquired Repton Priory in Derbyshire, said he did so for fear the birds will build their nests again. In the reign of Queen Mary, 1553 to 1558, there were attempts to re-establish monasticism. The Bridgentine nuns from Sion, who had gone into exile, returned. The observant Franciscans came back to Greenwich. 15 Carthusians returned to Sheen, and 8 Dominican canonesses to Dartford. And a new house of Dominican friars was established at Smithfield. But the destruction had been thorough, and Mary found it difficult to persuade former monks and nuns to resume religious life. Schemes for restoring Glastonbury and St Albans failed for lack of volunteers. And those who had gained property were not prepared to hand it back. And in any case, all the refoundations were closed down by Elizabeth. The dissolution of the monasteries was a huge change. Over 800 of the country's wealthiest and most influential institutions removed overnight. What was the effect? Well, some monastic churches became cathedrals, others were retained as parish churches. Some were simply too large for local requirements, and it was only the nave that was retained. That happened at Burton-on-Trent and Tutbury in Staffordshire and at Leominster. Parishes that had previously paid their tithes to support a religious house now paid them to a lay impropriator. Some monastic houses were reconstituted as collegiate churches, but it proved a temporary measure. They were all dissolved under the Chantries Act of 1547 by Edward VI. And along with the destruction of monastic buildings, the removal of shrines, the stripping of the altars, the other great cultural loss was the monastic libraries. Worcester Priory, which became Worcester Cathedral, had a library of 600 books. Only 6 are known to have survived. At the Abbey of the Augustinian Friars in York, of a library of 646 volumes, only 3 survived. Some were destroyed for their bindings, others were sold off by the cartload. The antiquarian John Leyland was commissioned by Henry VIII to rescue items of particular interest, things that perhaps dealt with English history. Other collections were made by private individuals, but much was lost, including manuscript books of English church music, none of which had then been printed. The Irish bishop John Bale said, "A great number of them which purchased these superstitious mansions reserved of those library books some to serve their jakes, toilet paper, some to scour candlesticks, dusters, some to rub their boots, shoe cleaning cloths, some they sold to the grocers and soap sellers." Some of the monastic infirmaries were refounded by private benefactors. St Bart's Hospital in London was given special royal dispensation to continue. It was granted to the City of London to administer, and it came with an endowment. And the monasteries had supplied food and alms for the poor and destitute. This role now has to be taken on by the state and private benefactors. Parishes were made liable for their own poor, and a raft of poor laws will follow. New almshouses and charities are founded by the Elizabethan gentry. The monasteries had undertaken schooling for their novices and choristers. This educational resource is lost. Where the monasteries had provided grammar schools for older scholars, these were by and large refounded, some by royal command, some in partnership with private individuals, others simply by private initiative. The monastic orders had maintained 6 colleges at Oxford and Cambridge. 5 of these survived as refoundations. The monks commonly looked for re-employment as parish clergy, reabsorbed into the secular world, where they form a major part of the new Anglican Church. Now, Henry VIII had promised that money from the dissolution would go to the founding or the endowment of religious, charitable and educational institutions. In the event, only 15% of the money raised went to those purposes. About a third of the income that was required to maintain pension payments, which left about half the money raised, which went into the royal coffers. The monasteries had been an integral part of life in England and Wales for a millennium. By the 12th century, there are hardly any areas without a local abbey or a priory. And the monks and nuns set themselves apart, and yet they were involved in everyday life. And few people in medieval England or Wales would have had no dealings with a religious house, all extinguished in less than a decade. And we've seen the monastic movement was one of continuous reform and change, founded to serve God in organised prayer as part of a community, but then developing into large agricultural and industrial businesses and commercial developers. And their impact on history is still all around us. The towns and the cities that owe their origins to the monasteries, the place names on our maps, magnificent ruins, the landscape they shaped, the echoes in our splendid medieval monastic cathedrals. So I hope you've enjoyed this series. Next time I'm going to tackle a topic that is rather different. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons and click on the notification bell to be informed when the next video is released. Or you can subscribe by clicking on the rose window over my shoulder.